Okay. So again, good evening to the others who joined us a bit late. Welcome to our Bible study. This is the 6th series. If you have missed any of this series, kindly go to YouTube under my name, Pastor Mohan Rao Pathasari, and you can watch the rest of the series. We have been studying on God, and the main title is Does God Exist? One of the most asked questions in the postmodern world. And we need to see how if this question can make sense. So far, we have, let me just, yes, so far the outline was evidence against the existence of God. We looked at it, what the world is saying, why they don't believe in God. Then many people say belief in God people or is very irrational. Is it true? And we looked at the evidence for God outside Bible. Then we looked at the evidence for God in the Bible. Then last week we looked at if God created the universe, then who created God? We looked at how that could be answered. And then today we will look at can belief in one God be proven? Because we believe in one God, but that the world has many gods. How can you prove that there is only one God? I have extended this study to one more. As I was preparing today, I felt there is a need for one more, and that will be next time. It will be, does it matter whether I believe in God or not? So what's the point? Does it make any difference? I think that will help us to wrap up properly everything that we have been studying. So God willing, we will look at that next time we meet. But for today, can belief in one God be proven? Why is this question important? Because we all know there are so many gods in the world. And if there are so many gods, then how can you say there's one God? And not only how can you say there's one God, how can you even say that your God is the real God and other gods are false gods? So we need to especially understand this question. Can belief in one God be proven? Now, there's so many religions in the world. Few of them I put here, some of the major ones. There are hundreds and thousands, but let's look at few of them. Atheism is actually progressing. It is spreading. Many people are becoming atheists. It's a form of a religion. Not believing in a God has become a form of a religion. Then we have agnosticism. That means this is a belief, ultimate reality. If they think there's ultimate reality, such as a God, is unknown or probably unknowable. In other words, one who is not committed to believing in either the existence or the non-existence of God. They're almost like atheists, but not. But they don't know. It's almost like that, neither here nor there. Then there's Baha'i faith. I'm sure you might have heard of it. We have a huge temple in Australia, in Sydney, India. Buddhism, mostly in the Asian countries, it's very prevalent. It is spreading in Western culture also. So many people believe in Buddhism, the meditation, the peace of life, or whatever their teaching is. And of course, Christianity, the biggest religion in the world, number one in terms of territory it occupies, and also in terms of numbers. Then Confucianism, then Druze, then Gnosticism. What is Gnosticism? It's the belief that human beings contain a piece of God, the highest good or a divine spark within themselves, which has fallen from the immaterial world into the bodies of humans. Gnosticism says that every human there is a element of God, so you can be a God too. And many others. Hinduism, I'm sure Hinduism is also very big. In fact, I think this is the third largest religion. So many Hindus, India itself have so many, and they believe in millions of gods, hundreds and thousands of gods, not just one God. Of course, Islam, they believe in one God. Jainism, Judaism, Judaism also believe in one God. Rastafarianism and Shinto, I don't know what that is. Sikhism, Zoroastrianism, traditional African religions, African diaspora religions, indigenous American religions. All this to say every tribe have their own religion. Within the tribes, even every, I don't know what you call, class or clan or group or village, you can see, especially in African and American indigenous and many other places, even in some Asian countries. It's almost like every village have their own god. And all these gods. So the question is, if all of them believe in God and they believe their gods, how can you say there's only one God? So when I talk of God, there are four different systems of belief in God. Of course, the first one is monotheism, which means we believe in one God. The example is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. These three religions promote belief in one God. Then there's polytheism. That means poly means many, theism means God. So belief in many gods. Example, Taoism, Shintoism, Chinese folk religion, Japanese Shinto, Santeria, most traditional African religions, and various neo-pagan faiths. They all believe in many gods. Of course, in the Hinduism, belief in one God while actually polytheism, Hinduism also can come there, but some scholars put it in this order. Monotheism, belief in one God while accepting the existence of other gods, like Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, Hellenistic religion, Canaanite religions, and early Judaism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That is interesting, isn't it? So what is the Henotheism? They not only they believe in one God, but they also believe other gods exist. That's what is Henotheism. Then finally, pantheism is a belief that reality is identical with divinity, or that all things compose or all encompassing immanent God. Pantheism means God is everywhere. You can find God in everything, in the tree, and plants, in animals, in humans, in the air. Everything you see is almost like whatever the reality you see around you, God is there. That is God, something like that. So all the belief, whatever the people believe about God, they all can be put under this. All those different religions, they fit into any one of these four categories of belief system in God. Now let's quickly look at them briefly before we ask the question, before we try to attempt why we believe in one God. Polytheism, the belief in or worship of more than one God. Today, polytheism is noted for many parts of Hinduism, Mahayana Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Shintoism, as well as contemporary tribal religions in Africa and in America. What do Zodin, Zeus, Ra, Vishnu, and Maitreya have in common? Each belong to a group of deities, with worshippers paying homage to multiple deities of varying power. These figures are part of polytheism, or the belief in and worship of many gods. The roots of this word, of course, as we said, poly, many, theism, gods. So what is polytheism? It belief in many gods. Maybe there is one supreme God and other gods and who worship him or who are so inferior to him. They share some works together, all sorts of things. This is how this goes. Typically, in polytheism, a particular deity is called upon for a specific event, a specific need, or a god's relationship with an area, grape fields, volcanoes, war, or families. God would be organized in pantheon, or a collection of all the gods of a group of people. Some examples would be the Norse pantheon, Greek or Roman pantheon, Egyptian pantheon. However, you have to be careful with the Roman pantheon because it was also the name of the building. Now, what is this saying is pantheon means certain gods are grouped into certain groups, and each god have a certain responsibility in the affairs of the earth or the universe or the world because there are many gods. Ancient pantheistic religions are often referred to as a mythology, a term that reduces them from the religions that have once were. For example, the Greek mythology of Zeus, Hera, Athena, Ares, and others were once a religion. When you look at the history of the Greece, especially in those days, We all know, I think, I don't know of the other gods, but at least I'm aware of Zeus and Athena. Hera and Ares, I don't have much knowledge. Powerful gods among the Greeks. You read them all in mythologies of the Greeks. But what do you see now? Even those days, they had priests and priestesses, prophets and followers. That's what you see in the history. But what about today? Nothing. But now it has been relegated to fantasy stories of the past. So if you talk about the gods of the Greeks now, what do you say? It's all they come under the category of myths or mythology. There is no priests or priestesses or prophets or followers of these gods right now. So what are we saying? So that's what is polytheism. Today's polytheism is noted for being part of Hinduism, as we said, all these things in Africa and other places. But many of these remain within cultures that have resisted attempts at religious conversion to a monotheistic religion. Many of these people are opposed to even accepting other religions because they believe in many gods. And they have found ways of having the two remain side by side. For example, it is not uncommon to have many parts of the world to have several religions buildings near each other. India is one of such that is possible. So polytheism is in that order. Now, where did this polytheism begin? It has been hypothesized that along with the Proto-Indo-European language, a natural form of religion formed as well. This primitive religion focused on deified versions of natural events and things. Some of the basic include the Sky Father, the Earth Mother, the World Tree, the Trickster, and other basic concepts. That means as the civilization developed, as people began to look at nature and its power, they gave names to sky and earth and moon and whatever they could see, as they believed them to be the gods because they are the source of life. Sunlight is necessary, oxygen is necessary, trees are necessary, earth is necessary. So, because they are a source of life to humans, they were counted to be gods. As time passed, the religion took on new complexities. Basic characteristics took on new features and aspects. For example, the basic sky father would become more supernatural, as seen in the Egyptian sun god with the falcon head and the solar disk, Ra, or more humans with the North Sky Father Odin. In other words, as they began to appreciate this nature and treat them like gods, as the time passed on, they also developed what we call who is a superior god, who is the most powerful god. And then during the time of Egyptians, sun worship was the greatest. They believed he is the greatest of God because sun has more power or whatever it was. So not only they believed in gods, different gods, now they also categorized the greatness of gods based on how they saw who seems to be the greatest. Okay, what happens, for examples of how they incorporated this? What happens when a group of people who worship Pantheon A comes into the contact with a group of people who worship Pantheon B? One option is that the groups worshipping different pantheons will go to war and attempt to eradicate the other side. But that takes a lot of work. You have to kill a lot of people and destroy a lot of useful stuff. So, I mean, this is we have seen most of the wars fought in Bible times and even more in history are related to gods. And when they go for wars, they go in the name of their god. When they win the battles, they give credit to their gods. So it's almost among the pantheon, though many nations believe in many gods, they also believe their own country gods or their own national gods are superior to other gods. We have such examples in the Bible where the ark of the Lord was captured by the Philistines. They take it and put it in front of their god Dagon, saying, our God is more powerful. He has humiliated the God of Israelites. So things like this. So this is how, they, as much as they believed in many gods, within that belief of polytheism, they believe there, though they have many gods, they have many gods within each clan or each tribe or each nation, and they believe their gods are superior to other gods. Next, we look at henotheism. That means is a term coined. This was coined by Max Muller to mean devotion to a single primary god while accepting the existence or possible existence of other deities. As we said, henotheism means they believe in one god, but they don't deny the existence of other gods. So that's what basically, by the name Max Muller, he's the one who brought about this kind of a theory. He means monotheism in principle and polytheism in fact. So in principle, God is one, but he has got many facets and many forms or whatever. I don't know what that means. But in fact, there are many gods. He made the term a center of his criticism of Western theological and religious exceptionism in relative to Eastern religions, focusing on a cultural dogma which held monotheism to be both fundamentally well defined and inherently superior to different conceptions of God. Variations on the term have been inclusive monotheism and monarchical polytheism, designed to differentiate different forms of the phenomenon. Related terms are monolatrism and ketonatheism, which are typically understood as subtypes of henotheism. The latter term is to the extension of henotheism. The point I'm trying to say is the one God at a time. There's another belief. Okay, there's one God at a time also is part of this belief. Henotheism is similar but less exclusive than monolatry because a monolater worships only one God, while the henotheist may worship with any within the pantheon, depending on circumstances. In some belief systems, the choice of the supreme deity within a henotheistic framework may be determined by culture, geographical, historical, or political reasons. In simple terms, henotheism is belief in one God, but not denying the fact that there are other gods. Within henotheism, there are other beliefs. You can believe in one God and also believe one God at a time. And within henotheism, again, those who practice this in different groups, just like polytheism, they believe the God is the who is a supreme God. The one supreme God is not one across all cultures. It's different from different cultures and different geographic, different historical or political reasons. They can choose which is that one God, and while the other gods fall into another category. Finally, pantheism. What is pantheism? Pantheism is the belief that reality is identical with divinity, or that all things compose an all-encompassing immanent God. Pantheism, the doctrine that the universe conceived of as a whole is God, and conversely, that there is no God but the combined substance, forces, and laws that are manifested in the existing universe. The cognate doctrine of pantheism asserts that God includes the universe as a part, though not the whole, of his being. In other words, when you talk of God, pantheist, everything you see is God. It may not be the whole of God, but it is a part of God. The trees, the plants, the animals, the air, the whatever naturally you will see, there is an inherent element of God in everything that you see around. That means believe that all that you see around is God, including humans. You're also God. Okay, so basically, this is how generally the whole system of belief around the world. Most of it you see, majority of the world's population believe anyway in more than one God. It's only few religions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is basically those are the three major religions that speak of just one God. When the whole world speaks of many gods, how can you say there's only one God? So the question is, can monotheism be proven? How do you know there's only one? Why do you think your God is so special? And everybody says their God is special. Everybody thinks their God is real. Everybody thinks their God is superior to other gods. How can you come to such conclusion? Monotheism, or the belief in a single God, cannot be proven inasmuch as any theory in philosophy or religion or science is impossible to prove. However, there are significant arguments for monotheism that point to it being a logical belief. The first rule to remember when discussing belief system is that no theory can be pure. If it is a theory, it's difficult to prove. It can only be the most current, logical, and available conclusion. Because of beliefs is something you can't really prove by experiment or by touch, and it's a theory. There's so many gods. The only logical conclusion is to use your brain and logically think which seems to be the most acceptable and come to a conclusion what is actually logically can be concluded. Now, there are certain arguments that can help us understand whether belief in one God makes sense or not. The first one is ontological argument, which means the argument from being, the very existence. We know we have studied this. Saint Anselm was the one who concepted this term, this of ontology, that then that which no greater can be thought. According to this, you can't think of anyone greater than God. God exists, and there is no one greater than Him. God is that then which no greater than. If you can think of something greater than God, then that is what is meant by God. So, what does this ontological argument say? Whoever is this great person, that is God, and it must he must be, or that power must be one. If there is something beyond that thing that we call God, which is greater than God, then that can't be a God, because that which is greater than God will become a God. There, because the God is the highest, infinite one. There's nothing equal to him. Otherwise, it can't be God. That's kind of the argument. If more than one God existed, there would have to be some way of individuating from one another. Suppose if you say there's more than one God, then you have to differentiate between each God. The only way of individuating one from another is by reference to something one has that others lack. So how do you differentiate between two gods or many gods? Is to see the difference between each of them. When you try to compare the difference between each of them, you're trying to say that something is lacking in some God, which is a help, which is a strength to somebody, which may not be the strength to other. So if you come to such a conclusion, but to admit that one or more of them lack something is to admit that there is a greater, then that can be thought. So if by comparing that and saying this God is superior than this, now you're trying to say one God is superior to the other, by which argument you are saying that that God can be limited. God cannot have all the powers. But ontological argument disproves that. Don says he must be all powerful, all knowing, self existing. There's nothing beyond him or after him. That's what is God. But if there's many gods who are inferior and superior, then a God who is inferior, less in power than the other one, cannot be a God because he is limited. So that's what it is. Continuing on the same argument, to be God is to have a certain nature or essence, such that if there were many gods, this essence would be shared equally. If God is one essence and if there are many gods, it has to be shared equally. But to speak of a multiplicity of gods is to admit difference between them, and difference is always a matter of inequality. When you differentiate them based on their powers, their responsibilities to rule the earth and all, it is not equal. It is an inequality because not everybody have the same power, not everybody does the same thing, not everybody are in the same category. So this argument begins by asking us to consider when it would be, what it would mean to say that there are many gods with a capital G. Presumably, one prerequisite would be to say that there are essentially the same. If God to be God is to be absolute being, unchanging, completely actualized being, then we must say as much of every God that exists. That means if you believe God is supreme, there's no one above him, all powerful, all knowing, there is no limit, there's no greater or lesser than him. But if you believe there's more than one God, then you have to put everybody under the same category. But the minute you categorize, there's many gods not equal in power, in reign, and other things, then that can't be God. If somebody is lesser than a God, then he or she or that thing cannot be a God, because God, the very definition of God is superior and all-knowing and no limit. So premise 2 raises the obvious question: just what is it that distinguishes this God from that God? Surely there must be some way of telling them apart. Perhaps God one is more powerful than God two, or perhaps God one is temporal, whereas God two is permanent, or perhaps God one is more knowledgeable than God. That means when you start believing in many gods, then you have to differentiate why there are many gods, what are their characteristics, what do they do. Then when you start doing that, you bring comparison between gods, and when you bring comparison between gods, you're tempted to say who is greater, who is not greater. And when you bring them in that category, then they can't remain as gods because they have not the same power. For example, Hinduism, and they believe in God. For them, there are three main gods. There are millions of gods. They have millions of gods, but they have three main gods. Brahma, they believe, is the creator, and the Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. That means it is Brahma who created the whole world, and then it is Vishnu who is preserving it. And if there's any destruction, anything, it is Shiva that is responsible. What do you see here? One creates, the other preserves, and the other destroys. So who is greater? Why are they not having the same powers? Can Vishnu be the creator? No. Can Shiva be the creator? No. Can Brahma be the preserver? No. They have different roles. They have different roles. So in other words, each is limited in what they do. One can only create, the other can only preserve, the other can only destroy, things like this. So when you keep asking, then who is greater? It depends on how you perceive what greatness is. Some could say, well, if he's not, if the Brahma didn't create, how can he preserve? That could be an argument. So he is the greatest and the preserver. If he is not preserving, then what's the point of creation? You could argue that he may be the greatest and the destroyer. Things like that. So there won't be end to arguments when you put gods in categories of the power or limitations of what they can do. The second argument is from the world itself, cosmological argument. For example, look at the universe exists. It is possible for things not to exist. Whatever has the possibility of non-existence yet exists has been caused to exist. That means that this universe had a cause. The universe could not bring itself into existence since it must exist to bring itself into existence. That's the science. There must be something that exists that is the cause for the existence of the rest of it. That's what it is. No science has now come to conclusion there was nothing in the beginning. Even the Big Bang theory and all, we have spoken about it. Something must have caused the beginning of everything. If there is nothing and something came out of nothing, that is very illogical because humanly it doesn't make sense. There cannot be an infinite number of causes to bring something into existence because an infinite regression going on forever has no initial cause at all. That means there is an infinite that brought the finite, but there is infinite number of causes. If there is more than one cause that brought the existence of everything, then you get into the confusion of what caused that infinite, which is that infinite that caused what is around, because we don't have knowledge of it. Therefore, there must be an uncaused cause of all things. No matter how many infinite things you think that are a cause of what is around, there still needs to be something which is infinite, which is singular, that is the cause of all the infinites, even if you were to believe there are more than one infinites. So the uncaused cause, that beginning, that one thing that is a cause of whatever your belief system is, can be only one, from which the rest all would have come. And that's what we call God. But how does this point to one God? Now we are talking about one God. How does what this cosmological argument come into scene? It doesn't directly, however, it doesn't give direct answer, but however, one God is more logical for a simple reason than one original cause is a less complicated answer than multiple causes, for which there also must be causes. Going all the way back to Aristotle on rhetoric, it is a point in logic to prefer the simpler explanation over the more complicated one. So, what does that mean? It is easy to believe that there is one being through whom everything is created than to believe there are millions of beings that are a cause of everything that exists. In other words, it is easy to believe a simpler explanation than the complicated one. If you believe in millions of gods, many gods that are a cause for the creation of the world or the sustenance of the world, then it is so complicated you have to understand every bit of it in terms of which god did what. So and what does the cosmological argument say regarding the existence of the universe? There was something in the beginning that was a cause of everything, like the Big Bang we said, some hot tiny spot, which was the cause of the entire universe, as we said. So it is easy to believe that than to say there are millions of that hot spot, which was the cause of everything. Then you have to specify which one brought which one. It is easy to believe there's one singular thing that is a cause of the entire universe than to believe there's millions that has the cause of the existing universe. Then you would ask the question, which person is responsible for which one, which is complicated. So the cosmological argument is saying it is better to believe in simple because it makes more sense. Furthermore, if the universe was created by multiple gods, these gods would have to be created, which would hearken back to an even greater God who would in fact be God. So either we believe all gods existed infinite, or there is a greater God who is the cause of the beings of other gods. If these gods have been created by a greater God, then they don't remain under the category of gods, they remain under the category of created beings, which is equal to you and me. So the cosmology doesn't accept this argument of many gods because the existing world and the evidence from what the science believe and is that everything has cause. That cause is one thing from which everything has come. The next argument is moral argument. Morality is relative. That's what think. The doctrine that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, or historical context and are not absolute. Many cultures now don't want to accept that morality is absolute, but in reality, that is not true. Why? Because relativism is a family of philosophical views which deny claims to objectivity within a particular domain and assert that facts in that domain are relative to the perspective of an observer and the context in which they are assessed. So, what kind of morality, when you say it's relative, it is not objective, it is not universal. It is based on the perception of the observer and the observer's background and context and culture that they were brought up with. They can decide and dictate how the morality is to be done. For example, if morality is truly subjective, there can be no argument against any or all behavior. Because subjective means you decide what is right and wrong. For example, genocide is, if suppose morality is subjective, then you're saying genocide is acceptable, rape is acceptable, torturing children is acceptable. If there is no moral standard, then anything at all is acceptable. That means some might say that moral standards then are created by society or evolution. This, however, leads to the terrifying conclusion that if the majority decides something, for example, genocide is right, think Nazi Germany, then it is in fact now morally right. That means if morality is subjective, majority of people decide this is what is right, that could become right because it is subjective. For example, genocide, if majority of the country thinks rape is acceptable, torturing children is acceptable, and they make a law, it is acceptable, and that is a moral law, then that's why they think morality is moral argument is subjective. But this leads, if you were to say that, this leads to the reasonable conclusion that there is some sort of transcendent moral standard somewhere out there. If everybody came out of some moral standards, Where is the beginning of the moral standards is the question we need to ask. If there is a transcendent objective moral standard, there must be a transcendent metaphysical sufficient creator of that standard. There is a transcendent objective moral standard according to our above discussion. That means, therefore, there is a transcendent metaphysical sufficient creator of the objective moral standard. But why a monotheistic God? Okay, suppose there is an objective morality, why it can't be from many gods? Why only from one God? Quite simply, if there is one objective transcendent moral standard, then it can only have been created by a completely transcendent being. And thus, if there were multiple transcendent beings, there would not be one completely transcendent being. And thus, there could not be one moral standard, but rather moral dissonance. If you believe in many gods, then you have to think of many moral standards. But if you think of many moral standards, then they are subjective because they have come not from one source, but from different source of how they saw it. The next is historical argument for monotheism. The first monotheistic religion developed in ancient Egypt during the reign of Akhenaten, but it failed to gain a foothold and disappeared soon after his death. Monotheism did not become a permanent fixture in the world until the adoption of monotheism by Hebrews in Babylon. So, in other words, history tells us Hebrew God, the religion of Hebrews, is not the beginning of monotheist. Ancient Egypt's worshipped only one God, but later it was Hebrews in Babylon that highlighted the worship of one God. While monotheism is often seen as something that derived from Judaism, the history of how monotheism became pervasive and expanded beyond Judaism is complex. Integrating both historical and archaeological data, we find that the rise of monotheism has been influenced by key political events. These political events helped transform not just these early monotheistic faiths, but also by extension many parts of the world today. It seems then that the most natural form of belief for human is monotheism, whereas other forms of beliefs tend to arise after centuries of cultural evolution. Of course, this does not necessarily mean anything, but it adds to building a case for monotheism. In other words, monotheism is basically the most ancient form of religion that the historians could trace to. It was after this that many forms of beliefs in many gods have come. So historically, monotheism has more accuracy than the rest of it, or also it's the ancient. The next is argument from evolution theory and Big Bang. Okay, uh, about the beginning. Now, all those who believe in evolution or Big Bang theory, this is what it says. Everything began from what? One single-celled ancestry around 3.5 billion years ago. There were not many. It was just one single thing. So even if you look from the point of evolution and Big Bang, the beginning of everything is from one single ancestor, whatever you call it. So if you believe it, so it makes more sense to believe in one God. When you believe the creation all began from one single cell, it simply means it also makes sense to believe there's one God from whom that every creation has been created. Big Bang, as we said last time, the broadly accepted theory of the origin and evolution of the universe is a Big Bang model, which states that the universe began as what? As an incredibly hot, dense point, roughly 13.7 billion years ago. So how did the universe go from being fraction of an inch, a few millimeters across to what it is today? We say it expanded. So from single point, it expanded. So everything has a beginning at one, not with many. The next argument is philosophical argument. If there were more than one God, well, look at what philosophy says. The universe would be in disorder because of multiple creators and authorities, but it is not in disorder. Therefore, there is only one God. Since God is completely perfect being, there cannot be a second God, for they would have to differ in some way, and to differ from complete perfection is to be less than perfect, and if there is anything that's less than perfect, then it can't be God. Since God is infinite in his existence, he cannot have parts. For parts cannot be added to reach infinity. So that makes sense in philosophical terms. Infinity means there is no beginning, there is no end. If you try to bring few parts together and try to form an infinity, it is impossible. Philosophically, even theologically, you cannot create infinity. So if you try to bring all gods together and create infinity, it is not acceptable. There must be an infinite God. So if God exists in not just a part of him, which it is for all things that can have existence or not, then he must have infinite existence. That means God is not a part of anything to make it infinite like how we think. If he is not a part of anything, then there's nothing equal to him. Therefore, there cannot be two infinite beings, for one would have to differ from the other. If there are two infinite beings and they differ, it doesn't make a philosophically a good argument. And the seventh one, biblical argument. What does Bible say? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord himself is God. There is none other besides him. Another place, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Have we not all one Father? Has not one God created us? Yet for us there is one God, the Father of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we live. One God, the Father of all, who is above all, and through all, and in you all. Well, after this, after another session of does God exist, we will look at Trinity, because that is another blame that Christianity we are tagged with. You say you're in one God, but you say Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You say Father is great, Son is less. They are two different beings. Is it not believing in polytheism? But yet you say you have one God. We will tackle that from the next topic. But for now, I just keep in God. It is one God. We don't worship three gods. For there is one God and one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself a ransom for all, to be testified in due time. You believe that there is one God? This was, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. This is the Bible clearly saying that there is one God. Look at Exodus 12:12. What does it say? I will bring judgments on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. In fact, if you see all the 10 plagues that God sent on Egypt, every plague is a symbol of one of the gods that they serve. It's a good study. Maybe someday we can do that. It's not simply a plague that he sent. He was attacking the gods that they believed had the power to save them. So God is saying he is the one who can destroy all the gods because he is the Lord, which means he is the only God. Did the biblical God just acknowledge other gods? No, he's saying they are not gods. He is the only God. Look at the first two commandments of the Bible itself. God spoke to all these words saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the home. You shall have no other gods before me. Why? There are other gods. That's why he's saying there is no. But he says them, what are the other gods like? They're carved images. They have a likeness of something in the earth or above. Most of the Egyptians god, they worshipped Nile River, they worshipped frogs, they worshipped sun, they worshipped water, all sorts. So they have an image. God is saying, no, they can't be an image to a God. You can't limit to God to some physicality. He has no physicality. He is a spirit. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, we know this commandment. So basically, if you go deep into all these arguments, you can come to conclusion. It makes more sense to believe in one infinity, who is the cause of the everything, than to believe many infinities who are limited in certain ways. And when some God is limited in certain ways, he can't be a God because God cannot be limited. So in Hinduism, there are gods that have been created after certain gods. If something can be created, then that cannot be a God. So, and belief in many gods, the nature can be destroyed. If you believe that the tree is a god, if an animal is a god, if something, and if you can destroy it, that means God is destroyed. If anything can be destroyed, then it can't be a God, because God cannot be destroyed. So believing in many gods is so complicated, and it doesn't logically come to any conclusion, but rather believing in one God who is supreme, who is infinite, who is the cause, who is the uncaused cause of everything, is more logically proven than belief in many gods. Okay, next week, sorry, I won't have class. I'm away for the Friday. But the following week, we will come back. I will do the last part. Does it matter whether I believe in God or not? Why do I put this? Even many Christians, sometimes they doubt God, and does it really matter? There are so many good people outside Christianity. They don't believe in God, yet they are so kind, so loving, so helpful. These people who believe in God are so mean spirited, and there's nothing happening. And I prayed a lot, nothing changes. I prayed and I fasted, still my mother died, my father died. I go through all the pain. What's the point of believing in God? Does it really matter, or is just in a mental exercise we want to keep? So I will try to address this next time we come. That's the end. Let me stop. Also stop the recording.